for posterity. Hopefully they clip this part out. So we're recording this, so if there's questions at the end, we've got a mic, and we'll have you guys ask your question into the mic so we can capture that for the folks that will be
forever. All of your embarrassing questions will now be
and then after
logged
that,
for all
we're
time.
actually going to rank the questions from dumbest to least dumb.
I'm going to do a bad job at introing this, most likely, but ThereminGoat and MechanicalBionicle, also SwitchOddities, owner of SwitchOddities. If you guys don't know ThereminGoat, he writes a lot of words about these silly little plastic things that we push into. This is the Untold Tales of Unsold Switches, a tour through some of the factory samples, color tests, and never released prototypes that they've been lucky to encounter and learn about over the years. So, gentlemen.
I said we're even luckier. We'll have 2 new switches that you all will be the first ones here to get to see today, including ones that will be passed around. So, without much else to it, I mean, as you guys probably know, there are quite literally thousands of different switches that exist out there, and we're just talking within, MX footprint alone. We're not talking Alps vintage or anything else like that. And most of these are produced without any R&D. They're kind of just take a color, make a switch, throw it out there. However, there are quite a few switches that do have the luck to have some R&D and some effort put into them. And so what we're presenting here today is basically a whole set of slides that are just talking about the stories of switches that never quite made it to production. These might be things like renders, such as the keyboard cacao switches here, which never existed beyond this one Instagram post here. These could be prototypes, like your Gateron FEI Matcha. You'll know that we stuck with number 1, but numbers 2, 3, and 4 were all voted out by the community. So these never existed beyond this photo. Or even things like changed plans. So I'm sure you guys might recognize Novelkeys' blueberry tactile switch here, but what you guys probably don't know is that there were also brown and red versions of these, which I've called brown and red berries, that have existed and never actually made their way to sale. And so how this is organized is we're going to go kind of in chunked by vendors. That seems to be the easiest way to do that. And so where we're going to start out today is with Zeal. You guys probably all recognize these. These are Zeal's 3-in-1 clicky switch. These are a multimodal tactile, linear, or clicky switch that was released in 2022. You guys had the option to open them up and then change either the click leaf or the way that the stem is oriented in order to get a different feeling in your switches. While people will remember these most for these, MechanicalBionicle and I here will remember them as being one of the first switches, or the only switches actually, to have both a Gateron and non-Gateron nameplate. So we have Zeal nameplates here for those of you who can see them at the bottom. However, what's interesting to note is that not every version of this switch necessarily had these nameplates. So if you look here, these were actually Zeal's original posts for these. And while they have been dubbed now for their weights, the green and yellows actually originally had color names with them, minty green and highlighter yellow. And you'll note if you look right where those 2 switches intersect, there's actually no Zeal nameplate here at all. So there exist factory samples of these switches that have the large Gateron housings that have no Zeal logo. And on the right, the actual original prototypes of these were done in orange. There was only a handful of these that were sent out to cool people to test them. I guess even though I'm sponsored by Zeal, I was not one of those cool people that got to see them. So I unfortunately will never have one in my collection, but they do exist for posterity in that. But what's interesting is that these were Zeal switches that people are familiar of the color of. These are things that a lot of you were around for. But what many of you weren't around for was the pre-COVID era switches. And so Zeal actually has quite a few other switches that have had potential other color prototypes to them. And if we go all the way back in 2016, Zeal posted a poll on GeekHack that says, would you be interested in the revival of linear Zealios? Mind you, these original linear Zealios were the ones in clear. Would you be interested in one if they were this colored pink? These don't look like the pink Valentine's Day Sicarios or Rosalios that later came out in 2018. So it does kind of wonder, was the community interested in them? Overwhelmingly, yes. 85% people were interested in them, but for whatever reason, Zeal thought, I don't feel like doing that. Now I asked Zeal, hey, I know you don't like sending me prototypes, but could you at least, send proof of life that this exists, mostly for my posterity, and just so I can know. And he informed me that this is actually a Photoshop. This switch never exists. And what's interesting is that after that, I decided to go through all of his pages on GeekHack, which mind you is about 12,000 different posts over the years, and I found what it was modeled after. Here is Zeal's sales photo from their round 4.5 Zealios switches. And he did a very good job of photoshopping a nice pink color to go with that. But if we go even further back, this is not the only instance we've had of Zealios switches in other colors. If you go back to the original Project Zealios post on GeekHack, Hoffman Mister, who is up there representing Drop today, you should stop by the table and ask him about it. He points out, hey, the original image for these switches had a red color to them. Why are there no red Zealios? And what's interesting is that we have no photo of them. In fact, the photo that Hoffman is pointing to here is this. This is the only known photo that exists of the red prototype Zeal switches that came before the purple color everyone comes to know today. And as Zeal pointed out at the end of his comment, the red ones were only factory samples, and he actually has a set, or had a set once upon a time, of original Zealios switches that were black, not purple, clear, or any of the colors that we've come to know today. So the history of odd colored switches and prototypes kind of goes all the way back. And to stick in Gatoron, but move outside of Zeal to some other stuff, these are a set of 3 switches that I have thankfully got in my collection. They were sent to me by way of JB from One Up Keyboards. He was talking to his rep at Gatoron, and they fished these out of a box for me. And so while some of you who've read my website might recognize these, many of you guys probably don't. These are 3 prototypes of switches that were never actually released to sale. Gatoron has part codes for their switches, KS3s, KS9s, KS3s being your original black ones, KS9s being the RGB ones that everyone's come to know. But there are a lot of missing KS2 numbers. KS2 is represented here on the left, and KS5 on the right. These are prototypes and KS numbers that don't exist anywhere else in the world except for these switches here in my collection. And then in the center, we have the KS1 Gatorons. These are the ones that have the ring around their stem like that and are very, very hard to come by. These are some of the first Gatoron switches that were ever sold. And while there was an orange one that was sold in this capacity, and you can actually buy some Rantopad orange switches from SwitchOddities today, there was never actually a yellow one released. This yellow one that was provided to me, also interestingly, has springs that bottom out at about 110 grams. So Gatoron's original yellow switches would have been bottoming out super heavy as opposed to where they are today. More interestingly about this KS5 prototype though, if you flip it over, you'll see that it doesn't actually actuate in the standard way that you would expect for a mechanical style switch. While you have those slots at the top for your leaves, what this is known as is a hammer over membrane mechanism. This actually exists in a couple of keyboards that are out there, specifically one HP board that has something like this. And I wish I had the post for you, but I recall it only because someone posted on our mechanical keyboards that HP was scamming everybody and selling mechanical keyboards that had rubber domes in them instead. So what this actually is that as you push the stem in, going from left to right, that center pole will actually poke through and press down on the membrane that sits underneath the switch. You get a sort of hybrid between mechanical and the classic rubber dome that you expect. However, Gatoron has never formally released these. So taking another step over to another vendor, we'll go ahead and visit TKC, the key company, for those of you who know. I will share immediately a photo that I'm sure Jason, the owner of TKC, is very unhappy that I have here today for us. This was provided to me a very long time ago by a former employee of TKC. And this was before Kiwis, Dragon Fruits, or any of these other switches were released here. This is TKC's plan for fruit switches. Now, many of you probably recognize these. These were incredibly popular when they were released. We have our tangerines on the far left, kiwis here in green, dragon fruits in the light pink, and the Aristotle-like clickies and blackberries there. However, some of you are a little more familiar with TKC switches, might recognize, or might not recognize, actually, what that switch is there at the end. And to date, this has never been released by TKC. And for the longest time, we were kind of left wondering as to, if we would ever see these or what even these were. Thankfully, in just about a year ago, there was another former employee of TKC who decided to leave the company, and they sold off a bunch of their prototypes of keyboards and switches that were never actually released. Among these were a lot of these, and what we actually have at the very end are what we now know as TKC watermelons. However, he didn't just sell me just those. He actually sent me several bags. I think I bought close to 400 or 500 switches. And among the pile that had TKC watermelons, you'll see that we have a range of stuff. We have what look like banana splits, or machos if you know the proper name for those. We have TKC watermelons, some dragon fruits, and some tangerines there. What's interesting about these, though, is that if you looked closely at the watermelons on the last slide, or look a little more closely here, you'll note that all of these have TKC nameplates, stylized TKC nameplates. The original versions of these were made in collaboration with a designer by the name of Z, and so they have, especially the tangerines, have C3 = Z across the top. Wanting to get away from that partnership or to try some other things, what it turns out is that not just the watermelons, but everything in all of these bags were TXC-made, TKC nameplated versions of the switches that were originally made by Durock JWK. And so what we have here is entire sets of bags that were at least suggestive that TKC was going to go ahead and move to TXC as their manufacturer. As I'm passing these around as well, we have some samples of all of these here that you guys can try, so please go ahead and pass them around. Interestingly, though, like I said, I bought 400 or 500 switches. You'll see that we actually have 2 more sets on here as well of neon green or neon yellow switches that were supposed to be released at some point alongside GMK Night Runner as well. These were referred to as safety switches. And I believe they are tactile, if I can remember correctly.
I'm pretty sure they were, yeah.
But these were all made alongside these TKC samples at TXC. So the testers we're passing around and that you guys will get to see are all unreleased TXC switches that never made it to the light of day. And I'll go ahead now and pass some talking over to SwitchOddities, and they can tell you some more about some other interesting switches we've tried.
Yeah, actually, real quick, because I don't remember if I asked you, but presumably these are probably from around the same time as Blackberries, which is why they would have been working with TXC in the first place.
I believe so. I actually, the dates are on the bags from TXC up there. If any of you guys have gotten switches from TXC before, which I imagine is probably no one else in the room except up here. They actually have like some labels on their bags that are very indicative of like what they are, what color they are, and they usually have the date and the salesperson who sold you them on there as well. So I believe they were from about that time.
Yeah, which would make sense why they're working with TXC, because Durock JWK was not interested in making the clicky for Blackberries, so they moved to TXC for those. And presumably were considering just moving the whole line, but that never happened. So we can move on down the line to some switches from Doohickeycaps. One of my favorite vendors. I've actually gotten to go down to Vegas and meet up with them in their warehouse, which is where I was able to collect some very fun samples.
I will caveat this. He told me last night over drinks that he Ubered there and then refused to leave until they physically escorted him out of the warehouse.
He offered to drive me back to the hotel. I was not escorted out, probably, legally. But for anyone who's familiar with Doohickeycaps, you will probably know their cookie dough, ice cream, the Doohickeycaps creameries. They had on the left, we have what actually came out, and on the right, we have a suspiciously fleshy looking early color sample that we can kind of guess why they didn't move forward with it. But this was the first version of that silent stem from KTT, which coincidentally, because it doesn't look like a normal KTT dust-proof stem, theirs are more angular than that crescent shape. Dankeebs mentioned that their rep told them, oh, these are from like a third-party, mold manufacturer, basically. Like, we contracted these out, more or less. So that's where those silent stems come from. Those are from some form of contract work. Not that it's unusual in the space. Most places don't make their own molds. But it's interesting because they're different and they're unique to just the KTT silent switches that they've released. We have even more stuff from Dankeebs. We have the monochrome series. You're probably going to recognize mostly the leftmost, the chalk in white, and the onyx in so black you can barely see it. Those two came out, and you can buy them. Actually, I think they're discontinued by now, but you could have bought them. But in the middle, marbles never existed. They got delayed, and then delayed again, and then delayed a third time. They were going to come out probably about a year after they were supposed to originally. But what happened is that part of the DK Creamery series, they came out with Cookies and Cream, which was a black and white tactile switch, which is what marbles were supposed to be. So they kind of decided it's just not going to happen. We would end up releasing the same switch. These are over a year old at this point. We don't know if people are even still interested in them. So there's a few samples laying around, but marbles never actually came out. On the that's the right. We have a gray sample in the back, no name, no information from KTT, sent pretty much blindly. They are pretty sure that that was supposed to be a full palm housing with an LY stem. They haven't made anything, Dankeebs hasn't made anything with that combination yet, although KTT has used some of those materials in newer switches. Below that are number 2 pencils. These were planned to come out last year for the back-to-school season. They didn't. Color samples took too long. On the left, it looks closer to normal in this, but in real life, the left is much too dark for number 2 pencils. They needed another round of color samples. Decided they liked the one on the right, but by then it was like August, and they'd have to wait in the production queue, order them. They were going to miss back to school. Officially, these may still come out in the future. They still like the idea. They have not told me whether they are or aren't coming this year, but they still like the idea, and they would still like to offer them at some point. Maybe this year. I genuinely don't know, but we're getting close to back to school season. I'd hate for them to miss it again. We have those third-party silent stems I was talking about, except these ones are tactile. These came with samples of the original cookie dough silent linears, and at the time, they were nothing but KTT being like, hey, we also offer this silent stem with a tactile bump, but they are what went on to become the KTT Red Velvets, which is a Dankeebs silent tactile switch. So these predate even the conceptual idea of Red Velvets, but that is what they eventually turned into a little over a year after, I think. We have some prototypes and development samples from Novelkeys with most of what's up top there. We have some samples for their black sesames, their blueberry chiffons, and Afflion sending out other people's switches with the Curious nameplate from Curious, I think it was Tamago, something along those lines.
Tamago Sushi.
Yeah, sushi.
To provide some more perspective, when you're in the process of prototyping switches from manufacturers, if you're trying new materials or want to try a new set of molds that you're not currently using, it's not uncommon for these factories to just use what exists in production currently. So these yellow housings were not obviously not the color they wanted for their blueberry chiffon switches, But when they're like, hey, we're interested in trying this material, they're like, cool, well, we're injection molding some in the back right now. You're just going to get to try that. So that's where you get a lot of these weird samples that look like they're just mismatched parts from other ones.
Yeah, and that'd be similar to like those kind of almost milkier stems. Those were, I forget what, but those were HDPE stems. And so that is probably another case of, this is what we've got. You know, you're trying out a new material. We're not, you know, doing it custom for your first round of samples. You can get, you know, looks like basically raw plastic, maybe a light blue dye. And if you like it, you know, then we'll move forward and customize it. But for the samples, you get what's readily available. And it means you get it quicker too, you know, you get to try it out. And then on the bottom here, we have red beans, which did come out, but they have both dustproof and regular MX stems that went through samples. And each of these also had a lubed and dry version that they were sampling. So they went through, not counting anything that might have been crazy early production samples, they had 4 fully color matched, custom nameplated options that they were going back and forth on before releasing the red beans that did eventually come out with dustproof stems is the release version, I think.
I think it is. It's actually funny. I remember they did only release one of those. I'm pretty sure it is the dustproof, but I've had both of them in my collection for so long I cannot remember which one the general audience can buy. I'm pretty sure it's the dustproof are the ones that were released.
And speaking of some earlier production samples, we have a whole bunch of top housings in different colors with slightly hard to see flash powder, essentially kind of like glitter in the housings, different colors and some clear ones. At the time, they were trying to make a transparent switch with flash powder as glitter, and they were calling it Clarity. It never came out because they ended up not liking the results of the flash powder in the switch. Ah!
Surprise, sorry. Don't record that. Okay, move it back there. I was trying to scroll through some of our notes here.
Yeah.
So
these never came out. They ended up not liking the effect. It was for largely for people who liked RGB, and it would give a little bit of added flair, and it just ended up not working out. So these samples exist, and not much more came of them at the time. These are from about 2 years ago, I think.
But yeah, so it's not as if they stopped there, though. What you guys briefly saw for a second is actually, these are the first looks at some brand new Switch aesthetics that Novelkeys is actually working on now. Following from that Clarity line, they've been testing actually B-Sun made housings that have gold flake here on the left, black flake in the center, and then gold painted or gold colored flakes on the far right here. And they've been prototyping, trying to get some neat effects, and what they've decided is that they actually like it enough to be releasing sometime soon their reserve line of switches. So these are B-Sun made, I assuming analogs to their matcha lattes, their red beans, and their blueberry chiffons that everyone likes, but they will have these milky top housings with gold flakes in them for aesthetics. So I found out about this about 48 hours ago. He found out about it last night, and so you guys are now among the first people to see these new switches, which will be coming soon. I didn't ask for pricing, but I did ask for free samples, so you guys should probably try that too. Let me know how that goes for you.
Yeah, and then to speak to the production process on those just a little bit, on the left, you know, what we don't always realize is that all these additives change stuff. So on the left, those gold flakes turned the top housing just the lightest bit of yellow, which at first they figured that they didn't want. So that's how we got the black flakes, which didn't do that, and the gold colored flakes, hoping to kind of, you know, not have any of the color leach into the plastic. But they ended up liking the effect of the original ones on the left, and as far as I'm aware, that's what they're moving forward with for their new line of switches through B-Sun.
For now. They did mention that the black flakes might be something that we will see in the future. I suspect for some other food-related switch as well.
Yeah, and then they do have some other food ideas I know they've mentioned. Afflion. We have multiple versions of ice kachangs from Keebs and Cables down in Australia. They had to go through this many samples because Afflion kept changing the spec on them. So they were originally using one of the few common Afflion stems at the time, especially the tactile, was shadows. Yellow stem, that's basically this. They were modified to be longer, I think, but that was basically the idea. We like this switch, let's make a new version we like more. They tried. Round one had the wrong spring weight, but they didn't know it. Round two, they switched the stem length on them, unknown to them, after fixing the spring weight. Round three, they had to go back to the round one stem length, but the spring weight felt too heavy, so they lowered it, even though 63.5 is what they were going for. The original 63.5s felt too heavy compared to other, actually, I know what it was. It was Flash Quark out of New York, I think. They were using Flash Quark springs in their in-house tests, and these felt way too heavy, so they brought them down to 58, which felt more like 63.5. Goes to show you Afflion's quality control is top of the line. For version 2, they got custom Keebs nameplates instead of the Afflion nameplate, and they also asked and prayed to Afflion to go lighter on the lube because the version 1s were over-lubed. They also lubed the stem legs, which can really reduce tactility in a tactile switch. It was not great. I am glad that we got a better version of it, that they stuck it out with Afflion, but they sure had to fight to get these to come out the way they originally envisioned them. And a few other odd switches we have laying around that might not have as much story to them, but up here we have also from Afflion Pulsar switches. Most of you probably know them either from budget OEM boards or their mice are much better and much more popular. They use Otemu switches for all of their boards so far, and these were supposed to come out in 2021. They still haven't. I don't think they ever will. They're not even teased on the website anymore. They've been scrubbed from existence. But a few samples made it out into sponsored reviewers' hands and stuff like that. These are the white hole and black hole switches, linear and tactile respectively. The black hole would be closest to Afflion Shadow that the Ice Kachangs ended up being based off of. They're really nice. I wish they came out. They never did. I'm glad that I got them only probably about a month ago. They were a little miniature grail for me because they're a kind of silly switch, but they were in an early blog that I wrote that, oh, what are these? Who are they made by? Whatever. And then they never came out. I figured I'd never get them. But a buddy was able to pass along to, they had been previously sponsored by Pulsar and had some laying around. In the other corner, we have samples from Grain Gold, who we might not be as familiar with, but they've made switches for Ajaz, for QWERTY keys, for Red Dragon, and Geon now. So some of those switches that you might know, Geon Raw Hall Effects, are by Grain Gold unofficially. They're manufactured by Geon officially, but the molds match. Same with the Neo Lavender Hall Effects. Those are not officially Grain Gold, but they are. These are some of their very first production samples that I was able to get a hold of. The pink ones, not all too special. They were linears and different spring weights, although quite pretty. The purple with the red stem is the first tactile switch that they ever made samples of. This is 6 months to maybe even a year before they released their first tactile switch, which did actually come out in not that purple, but a purple housing. Those are CIY Evo S is, if I'm remembering correctly, Evo Purple S is, I think, the first tactile switch they released. And that nice light purple up there with glitter in it was the first time we saw that Grain Gold could put glitter into switches. They've at least 2 years old now, and they've only just put it into a production switch with G-Square/Goo Black Knight Hall effect switches. So they have a black Hall effect switch with glitter in it. Took them almost 2 years to either perfect it for a production switch or to get someone who was interested in running one. Maybe it costs extra. I'm sure it's more complicated. And at the bottom, we have 2 Gazoo unreleased production samples. These are both U4Ts from around the time that he switched from Boba Plastic proprietary blend to Gazoo Plastic proprietary blend because of yellowing issues, ironically, even though that's not what this is supposed to be an example of. These are early samples of Gazoo proprietary plastic, supposed to be undyed raw plastics. I do not have the context for why one is white and yellow. They might have tried different plastics. It might have been an early blend that did still yellow, like the older Boba plastic. I don't know, but I've been told that both of these are undyed. And then the circular LED slot is, I think, indicative of, he recently released Gazoo U4T V2, which was mostly a revision on thicker pins because Otemu has historically thin pins and they can be kind of flimsy. And the only place I can find reference to this is Stupid Bullets mentions in the description, the V2s have an LED slot like parentheses equal sign parentheses, which I assume to mean they're these round slots instead of Gazoo's traditional squares. Or literally anything else.
Then taking the reins back, we'll move to our last vendor who's nice enough to provide us both samples, and then we'll also have the final switch, or the final new switch to show you guys. AE Boards, an Australian brand that you guys probably have heard about, not only for their navies and raid switches, but also for their constellation boards, among quite a few others that have been very popular. Keyboard Treehouse is the kind of collective out of Australia that they sell out of. So what we have here is we're going to go through kind of some of the history of some of the stuff they have. While AE Boards and their owner, whose name is I believe pronounced Aryx, it's AERYXZ, has some interesting connections to Switch history in that, while they've made these switches here from TXI, they were actually pointed to TXI by other Switch royalty in the name of Envier. So your original Panda designers, the ones who made the Envier Pandas, are actually the ones who pointed Aryx to TXI as a production company to start with. So what we have here on the right are your navies. Well, on the left you have your 2 navies. The one with a clear stem were they were released as a switch. They're ultra high molecular weight polyethylene stems. These are the same stems I believe that they eventually offered later on as individual packs. Those, because they had mold issues, didn't sell much at all. But we do still have a couple of packs lying around. And then on the right, you have the white stemmed versions of the navies and raids that a lot of people have come to recognize. Pointing more to that Envier history that I mentioned before, I also am lucky enough to have in my collection a prototype they were going to try for clear housings that actually have that Envier nameplate, kind of like you would have had for the original Envier Pandas, but instead of in white, it's an entirely clear housing. If you guys don't recognize the Navy V1s or the Raid V1s, you guys probably will recognize the V2s and for their all like single color housings. As well, there are black V2 switches as well. I'm going to start passing these around. Oh, you can? Thank you. We'll start passing these around now. There's going to be some switches on here that you guys will get to in the coming slides. So sorry for those of you who are up front, but it did take a while to get through the crowd. But what's interesting is that these were released, we'll probably say around 2022. However, that is not the only switches that they were going to release. In fact, one of the things that they were prototyping around 22 were that of TXI low profiles as well. And not photographed here, there is a V2 one in red that has a solid red stem as well. These are the switches that are like half height and have like only like a 2.7 millimeter total travel distance. And while these were never released, and I don't believe they plan to release them, there were blue and red versions made for these switches, as opposed to the only released TXC low profiles, which were done in all yellow. And those low profile ones are there on those testers for you guys to see. While we, at least here in the US or anywhere outside of Australia, might recognize the raids, the navies and the blacks, the ones that we probably don't see are that of the snag and all-clack switches. These were Australian and New Zealand specific community releases. They were sold a little bit on Keyboard Treehouse, but primarily sold through the Australian Discord, which if you've ever tried to get into, you have to provide some form of, I don't know, like some sort of identification that I guess only Australian people have. And you will be exiled to Easter Island if you don't have that. So good luck getting in there. I assume none of you here are from Australia. But the snag switches, they were a limited run. They had the same polyethylene stems that we talked about before that didn't exactly have the best mold tolerances. Colored after, I believe the name is Bunnings, which is a hardware store only in Australia. Again, I'm not Australian, so sorry for those of you who are watching this recording later and trying to correct me through the screen. And the All Clacks as well, referencing the All Blacks, some of the New Zealand sports teams. However, there's a third switch that exists in pretty rare number. We'll say less than 10 I've ever actually seen. There was a full yellow and green version of these as well, with the AE boards, completely covered LED slots. Yellow and green being, again, another color common to see in Australian sports teams. You'll probably see some of that during the Olympics as well. But yeah, so less than 10 of those exist. I don't believe they have any plans to release them, but just another example of color prototypes. And so while they've been more than generous to provide all these and then even more samples for me to dig through, they did also want to share that they have a brand new switch, or type of switch actually, that will be coming out here soon. And without much more to it, they don't have a name yet, but AE Boards is working on TXC-made MX-EC hybrids. These are what you have up here. I won't pass these around, but afterward you guys are more than welcome to come see them, or they'll also be up at my table. These are, while these are raid colored in that dark red and maroon color, they actually are struggling at the moment to make linear domes. What they have currently are these tactile domes, and so these will probably actually be released in a navy color. And they're working on making PCBs and plates to make these backwards compatible with all AE Boards keyboards. So if you have one of their boards, you will be able to make these MX-EC hybrid ones. And then if you look on the bottom side of these, if you come up close, you'll actually see that they have electrocapacitive springs, like common ones, like the conical ones you see. They have O-rings built in to stop spring crunch. And then the actual domes are colored to the switch themselves. We have prototype 35 and 45 gram domes. And while they are struggling to make some linear ones at the moment, I believe he said they've had some success in some limited samples. So I expect that you might see linear ones coming as well. So what we have here, we don't have a name for them, but they are the first TXC MX-EC hybrid switches. So coming soon. And then as well, one more thing, they offered up at the last minute. Not that these are available yet, and not that many of those switches are necessarily available, but navies, raids, and blacks are available at Keyboard Treehouse, and they've provided us all here discount code Chicago10. It's 10% off basically anything in the store if you guys want to go buy from them. That's good for like another week or two, so those of you at home watching this recording soon, you can get on that. But yeah, so if you guys want to check their stuff out, buy some of those switches, or you find interesting some of the ones up there on the testers, feel free to check them out. And that is all we have for now. I guess if you guys have any questions, thoughts. Please. believe we got about 5 minutes to pass some questions around. So.
And we're passing the microphone?
Yeah, we get the mic.
Ooh.
This
is just a room mic?
Well,
Oh,
Speak loudly.
speak. Yell.
In the first slide, when you had the Gator KS1 yellow switches, the stem was completely unusually shaped. Was there any reason given, or was there any design intent behind that?
So unfortunately not, because the Gatoron KS1s were released around that like 2014 era, shortly after Cherry's patent lapse. There's not a lot of documentation. Gatoron doesn't really talk about them much at all if you can find them. One thing that's been suggested of them, if we could actually go back to that slide, one thing that was suggested of those is that at the time, a popular modification would be to put O-rings on top of switches between the keycaps, and that this might have been Gatoron's way of attempting to cater to that, in that it would give you a slot for your O-rings to sit in rather than just directly on top of the stems. So, it's a good question. Please.
sure.
Generally, for electrocapacitive switches, the metal spring and the rubber dome, which are they together acting towards the return stroke of the spring for the springiness of the switch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are. It will be, the spring itself does provide some amount of force, but I believe it's fairly minimal compared to the domes. If my understanding, not that I'm an EC guy, is that those springs help keep the domes in shape, whereas if you were just to compress the domes, they might like collapse in on themselves in a weird fashion. Those springs kind of help keep it there. So.
Yeah, I think, and I'm barely remembering, but I think the springs are, in the range of 5 grams or so. They're not doing much, if anything, besides, holding shape, and the dome is what's giving you, your return weight. Yeah?
I have a question on the MXPC hybrid switch. Are those springs exposed to the PCB like other EC switches, or is there a bottom housing to the MX switch that is like an additional?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'm not certain. I would imagine, so what they provided, you can see the spring here. Yeah, so what they provided is this. I believe they're working on a PCB and a plate. How that will be, I don't know. I'd imagine it might be similar. I think the biggest effort is that there's a lot of new mold efforts that went into this, so a lot of it was making it compatible to existing technologies and hopefully bridging that MX-EC gap. So I'm not sure they're trying to be super creative with the EC side. It's more so, we've got new molds for housings to try and make this that way. I think also something I didn't include in here as well. So these molds are owned partially between TWCKM and AE Boards. AE Boards has distribution and design rights around the world, but you may see MX-EC hybrids like these ones here coming out of China that will be different colored as well. So,
Over there?
So basically, those are just fitting into normal MX slots, but are meant for an EC design board, right?
I believe so. I believe they do fit in normal MX.
Let's find out.
Let's find out live. Yes. They do fit.
So are they releasing any design documents for people who make PCBs for those?
I'm not entirely sure. I would imagine they do. Eric's and then all the 3 guys that run AE Boards are very forthcoming with stuff like that.
Do they have a Discord or?
I believe they do have a Discord. You can try reaching out to them. I guess it's probably through their website.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you see any long-term merit in certain design gimmicks like the ball bearing switches?
Yes.
Like those types of things, with a addition to the stem or boundary housing to increase smoothness.
So the question was, do I see any potential benefit to be had and stuff like that? Well, it keeps them selling switches, so I assume to that end, yes. Some of that stuff, I believe there is more design effort that can go into the MX footprint. The MX footprint is, as what you guys have here, it's effectively the same design it's been since Cherry first developed it. I think the ball bearings, while maybe not exactly the best examples of stuff for some of the other ones, rail designs that we've seen, bottom housing designs we've seen, are pointing to that there are other structures that exist within this footprint that can make for a better switch. And I think, there's merit in exploring those. I think through that exploration, through this prototyping, if this didn't convince you, we might actually get something that's more going to be usable to a wider audience. However, how we get there is probably going to be through quite a few attempts.
We'll go here.
Yeah, sorry, a two-parter. Someone has to ask both your personal favorite Switch ever made, and then also, I know it's hard, there's a couple thousand. What's the worst Switch you guys have ever seen made? No bad faith if you don't want to drag someone under the bus.
I'll go because I have at least like half of a canned response. So I like a medium tactile is usually what I'm going for. One of my early favorites were the Acco CS Ocean Blues and Lavender Purples that came out. Then KTT Matcha, which if you haven't seen it, it's radioactive green. But KTT sometimes has some issues with spring noise and stuff. What I've moved on to and is in my daily driver are Jersey Violets. Same kind of bump shape, but good. So that's what I've been using for over a year now, I think, on my daily driver. And if I'm gonna go with a worst switch, I'll go with what I think is the easy answer because maybe Goat has something better, but I'm gonna say eSwitch is an American company producing switches through China. We're pretty sure. We've asked some questions. They don't give a lot of answers. Their stems are sandpaper. It's a emoji and sticker on the Switch Modders Discord. It's so bad you can see it just in any close-up picture. They are the roughest stems I've ever seen. People have broken them in and diamond polished them to get them to cherry level of smooth. Oh, and also the housings are ridiculously fragile, so if you try to open them to lube them or something, they might just explode.
And then I guess I don't have a canned answer for a favorite because I haven't found it yet. Maybe somewhere in the next couple thousand switches I'll find an answer for that. As for bad ones, I have ones that are bad mostly on a function of condition. So MechanicalBionicle actually gifted me another Oxwind Gray for my collection today because the one that I have had to have been submerged in water and then, assumedly dropped in the ocean and then dried on the beach because I can't tell what it is. And when I say I can't tell what it is, I can't tell you if it is supposed to be linear, tactile, or clicky. So I've been needing one of those for a while. I also there's a very niche set of modern Alps clones that have part numbers like AKCN2 or DN2. My batch that I got had very poor tolerances, and so if you would hold, if you're familiar with Alps switches, they have a rectangular stem like this. If you'd hold the switch sideways from the back and move it up and down, you could actually get the stem to flop back and forth in the housing, which is probably not intentional. So those are two of my worst ones. Not that I think necessarily either of those are bad switches. I have some pretty rough ones that I've seen. So, yeah.
Another two-parter question. One, out of curiosity, what are your current daily driver keyboards? And two, how often do you break hot swap sockets?
I'll short your answer because he's struggling. We build keyboards in a lot less than I think the average person in the hobby. We like switches, obviously, but we don't really build much. I can't even think of the last time I've built stuff. I've bought several cases, buddies' designs and whatnot. My last keyboard that I built, I've probably built it 3 or so years ago. It's actually a prototype. Alchemist Keyboards Petrichor. It's the one that was just on Group Buy with Canon keys for $220, something like that.
Yeah, right about there.
Mine is purple. That was not a color that was on release. And I have Bolsa supplies Technoviolets. I have an earlier batch of the V2 samples they provided me. The difference between perhaps my switches and then what you might get is that almost all of the reviews I've written on the website have been done by a grand total of 3 keyboards. So I have beaten that keyboard to death, and then the previous one before that I've beaten to death as well. I don't have any builds that have hot swap sockets on them, so everything I have is soldered in. Have I heard of people breaking them? Yeah, but I'm also a little bit of a keyboard boomer when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I've got I think it's NYM96. It was a budget acrylic stacked version of the Melody 96. I got it used about 3 years ago now. That's been my on and off daily driver, and I've been using it actually more and more lately. That's what's got the Jersey Violets in it. And that came to me with 3 broken hot swap sockets. And since repairing those, I don't know that I've broken a hot swap socket. I might have pushed the contacts out on one and needed to like tweeze them back a little, but I don't think I've had to like desolder, resolder, or replace a hot swap socket on anything outside of the ones that came to me broken in the first place.
I think that is all the time we have today. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Thank you guys for being here.
All these prototypes I'll have up at my table, which is right across from SwitchOddities as well. So if you didn't get a chance to spend enough time testing them, please come by or ask me and I will gladly show you anything we have, wherever that 4th one is.
Thanks all.
Yeah, it's coming to us right now.
Yeah, thanks, man.